The newspaper feels like sandpaper between my fingers. I've read the obituary 17 times now, each word cutting deeper than the last. Michael James Thompson, 52, beloved son, devoted church member, survived by his wife Sarah and 2 children. The lies stack up like kindling, ready to burst into flames if anyone dared to strike a match. But no one will. They never do. I set the paper down on my kitchen table, next to the half-empty bottle of Ativan and yesterday's untouched toast. The morning light streaming through my apartment window feels too bright, too cheerful for what I'm holding. My hands shake as I reach for my coffee cup. The same tremor that's plagued me for 38 years, ever since that first night when I woke up trapped in my own bedroom. Beloved son. The words mock me from the page. The phone rings, shrill and demanding. I know I should answer it. I've been dodging calls for 2 days now, ever since the funeral home published that sanitized version of Michael's life. But something tells me this call is different. This one won't be another neighbor offering casseroles and hollow condolences. Hello? My voice comes out as a whisper. Mrs. Thompson. This is Pastor Williams from St. Mark's Lutheran. His voice is warm, practiced in the art of comforting the grieving. I'm so sorry for your loss. Michael was truly special to our congregation. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. Michael had always been special to everyone except the one person who mattered most, the one person who knew what lurked beneath that angelic voice and cherubic smile. I was wondering, Pastor Williams continues, if you might consider speaking at the funeral service tomorrow. I know it's short notice, but I thought ... Well, who better to tell us about Michael's heart than the woman who raised him? The woman who raised him. The irony is so sharp it could cut glass. I raised a monster, and somehow he became everyone else's angel. I ... I start, then stop. What could I possibly say? That Michael sang solos about love and family while keeping me locked in closets? That he quoted scripture while systematically destroying my spirit? That the boy who moved congregations to tears with his rendition of Amazing Grace showed me no grace at all? Mrs. Thompson, are you still there? 23 years. That's how long it's been since I've seen my son. 23 years since. I changed my name, moved 3 states away, and built a new life where nobody knew about the sweet-voiced boy who made my existence a living hell. 23 years of therapy, medication and sleepless nights, trying to convince myself that I wasn't the terrible mother everyone believed me to be. I need time to think. I finally manage. Of course. It's tomorrow at 2 o'clock. We'd be honored to have you there, even if you don't speak. Michael talked about you often, you know. He said you were ... complicated. Complicated. Even in death, Michael gets the last word. Even in death, he manages to plant seeds of doubt about my character, my sanity, my worth as a mother. I'll let you know. I hang up before Pastor Williams can respond, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. The familiar tightness in my chest begins to build. The same sensation I felt every time I heard Michael's key in the lock, every time his footsteps approached my bedroom door, every time he smiled that perfect smile that everyone else found so charming. The prescription bottle rattles as I shake out a pill. Ativan, 1 milligram. Take as needed for anxiety, if only. Dr. Martinez knew what as needed really meant for someone like me. If only she understood that some anxieties don't fade with time or therapy or medication. They just learn to hide better. I walk to my bedroom window and stare out at the quiet street below. Mrs. Patterson from 3B is walking her little terrier. The mailman waves to the young mother pushing a stroller. Normal people living normal lives. blissfully unaware that predators don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they stand in church choirs, bathed in stained glass light, their voices raised in praise. My reflection stares back at me from the window. A 78-year-old woman with silver hair and hollow eyes, wearing a faded blue robe that's seen better decades. I look fragile, breakable, the kind of woman people automatically want to protect or pity. If only they knew that I survived something no mother should ever have to endure. The newspaper rustles as a breeze from the air conditioning disturbs its pages. Michael's face smiles up at me from the obituary photo, the same face that haunted my dreams for decades. Even in death, he looks innocent, trustworthy. The kind of man you'd want leading your church choir, teaching your children, living next door. The kind of man who would never, ever hurt his own mother. I need to decide about the funeral. I need to decide whether I can stand in front of Michael's congregation and lie about the son who destroyed my life. I need to decide whether 23 years of distance and healing is enough to face the community that chose to believe a child over his victim. But right now, all I can do is reach for another pill and pray for the strength to survive tomorrow, just like I've done every day since I escaped the prison of my own home. The phone sits silent on the table, waiting for my answer, just like I once waited, trapped and terrified, for Michael to decide when I'd earn my freedom. Some things, I realize, never really change. The memory hits me like a physical blow, as vivid as if it happened yesterday, instead of 43 years ago. I'm back in St. Mark's Lutheran, sitting in the front pew, wearing my best navy dress with the pearl buttons, the one I'd worn to Robert's funeral just 6 months earlier, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne when I pressed my face into the fabric during those long, sleepless nights. Michael stands in the choir loft, 8 years old and beautiful in his white surplice, his dark hair perfectly combed, his small hands clasped in front of him. When he opens his mouth to sing the opening notes of How Great Thou Art, the entire congregation seems to hold its breath. His voice is pure silver, untouched by the world's cruelty, lifting toward the vaulted ceiling like a prayer made audible. I remember the pride swelling in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. This was my son, my brilliant, talented, perfect son, the light that had carried me through the darkness of losing Robert, the reason I got up each morning and pretended life was worth living. When Mrs. Henderson leaned over to whisper, "Eleanor, you must be so proud," I could only nod, tears streaming down my cheeks. If only I had known that angels can fall so far they become demons. The hymn ends to thunderous applause, unusual for our reserved Lutheran congregation, but Michael's voice had that effect on people. He catches my eye and smiles, that radiant smile that made everyone who saw it feel chosen, special. I mouth, "I love you," and he nods, still glowing with the aftermath of his performance. 3 hours later, I'm clawing at my bedroom door like a trapped animal. The transition from church to home is always jarring in my memories. One moment I'm basking in the collective admiration for my son. The next I'm discovering that the boy who sang about God's love had barricaded me in my own bedroom while I napped. "Michael," I call out, my voice still thick with sleep and confusion. "Michael, what's wrong with the door?" The heavy oak door that Robert installed when we first moved into the house, solid, reliable, meant to keep danger out, has become my prison. I can hear furniture scraping against the hardwood floor on the other side. The antique bureau that belonged to my grandmother. The reading chair Robert used to sit in while I brushed my hair at the vanity. "Michael, please answer me." But there's only silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your eardrums until you're certain you're going deaf. I press my ear to the door, straining to hear footsteps, breathing, anything that might tell me where my son is or what he's thinking. The panic starts small, a flutter in my chest, a slight quickening of my pulse, But as minutes stretch into an hour, then two, it builds into something monstrous. I pound on the door until my fists are raw, kick at it until my feet ache through my slippers. The windows in my bedroom face the backyard, too high to safely jump from. And even if I could, how would I explain to the neighbors why I was climbing out of my own window? By the time the furniture finally scrapes away from the door, a sound that will haunt my dreams for decades, I'm hyperventilating, my nightgown soaked with sweat, my throat raw from screaming. Michael stands in the doorway, still wearing his church clothes, his bow tie slightly askew. His expression is serene, almost peaceful, as if he's just returned from a pleasant walk rather than imprisoning his mother for 3 hours. "I'm sorry, Mama," he says, and his voice still carries traces of that angelic quality that mesmerized the congregation. "But you were having bad dreams again. I could hear you crying in your sleep." I stare at him, my mind struggling to process what he's saying. "Bad dreams?" "About Daddy. You were calling his name and crying. It scared me." His lower lip trembles slightly, and for a moment he looks like the grieving 8-year-old he is. I thought if I kept you safe in your room, the dreams couldn't hurt you." The explanation is so earnest, so seemingly innocent, that I almost believe it. Almost. But there's something in his eyes, a calculating stillness that doesn't match his trembling lip or concerned tone. Something that makes my skin crawl even, as my heart breaks for this child who's lost his father. "Sweetheart, you can't lock Mama in her room. That's not how we help people with bad dreams." "But it worked, didn't it?" He steps closer, and I resist the urge to back away. "You're not crying anymore. You're not calling for Daddy." He's right. I'm not crying anymore. I'm too terrified to cry. "Promise me you won't do this again, Michael." He nods solemnly, but that strange stillness remains in his eyes. "I promise, Mama. I just want to take care of you. Since Daddy can't anymore." I pull him into my arms, inhaling the scent of his hair, feeling the delicate bones of his shoulders beneath my hands. He's just a child, I tell myself. A confused, grieving child trying to make sense of a world that's lost its anchor. The locked door, the furniture barricade. It's misguided but born of love, surely. But even as I hold him, even as I stroke his hair and whisper that everything will be okay, I can't shake the feeling that something fundamental has shifted. That the boy who sang like an angel in church this morning has shown me something dark and deliberate in the sanctuary of our home. I should have trusted that instinct. I should have run them while I still could. Instead, I chose to believe that love could conquer whatever darkness was growing behind those innocent eyes. It was the first of many mistakes that would cost me everything. The locked bedroom door wasn't an isolated incident. I realized that now, sitting in my apartment 4 decades later, but back then I clung to the hope that it was just a phase. A child's misguided attempt to process grief. I told myself that Michael would grow out of it. That time would heal whatever was broken inside him. I was wrong about everything. The second time, it was the hall closet. I'd been folding laundry when exhaustion overtook me, the bone-deep weariness. That had become my constant companion since Robert's death. I dozed off on the couch, and when I woke, I found myself in complete darkness, surrounded by winter coats and the musty smell of mothballs. My first thought was confusion. How had I gotten here? Had I been sleepwalking? But when I reached for the door handle, my blood turned to ice. There was no handle on the inside. The closet door opened outward, and something heavy was pressed against it from the outside. "Michael?" I called out, my voice muffled by the thick coats. "Michael, are you there?" Silence. Always that damning silence. I pushed against the door with my shoulder, but it wouldn't budge. The space was so narrow I could barely turn around, and the ceiling so low I had to crouch. My breathing became rapid and shallow as the walls seemed to press closer. I'd never considered myself claustrophobic before, but trapped in that suffocating darkness, I understood true panic for the first time. 4 hours. That's how long Michael left me in there. 4 hours of fighting down screams, of forcing myself to breathe slowly, of wondering if my own son had completely lost his mind. When the door finally opened, I stumbled out. My legs cramped and unsteady. Michael stood there holding a glass of water, his expression one of mild concern. You were sleepwalking again, Mama. You went right into the closet and wouldn't come out when I called you. I was afraid you might hurt yourself if I forced the door. I wasn't sleepwalking, I said, my voice hoarse from hours of shallow breathing. I was sleeping on the couch. I remember. No, Mama. His voice was patient, almost pitying. You were walking around the house, talking to Daddy. You said you were looking for him. It scared me. The certainty in his voice made me doubt myself. Had I been sleepwalking? The grief had been playing tricks on my mind in other ways. Phantom sounds of Robert's voice, the scent of his aftershave in empty rooms. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe I was losing my grip on reality. But then came the basement. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the closet incident. I'd been in the basement doing laundry when I heard Michael's footsteps on the stairs above me. The light went out first, the single bulb that illuminated the concrete space where we kept the washer and dryer. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of the door closing, followed by the scrape of metal on metal. The basement door had an old slide bolt on the outside, something Robert had installed years ago to keep curious neighborhood children from wandering into the potentially dangerous space. I never thought of it as a weapon before. This time, I knew immediately what was happening. There was no confusion, no self-doubt. I ran up the wooden steps and pounded on the door, screaming Michael's name until my throat was raw. The basement was pitch black, and I knew from memory that the walls were lined with Robert's old workshop tools, saws, hammers, things that could cause serious injury if I stumbled into them in the dark. Michael, please. I'm scared of the dark. You know I'm scared of the dark. It was true. Since childhood, I needed at least a small light to sleep. Robert used to tease me gently about it, calling me his little firefly, because I was always turning on lamps. Michael knew this about me. He'd known it his entire life. That's when I realized the truth that I'd been desperately trying to avoid. This wasn't confusion or grief-induced sleepwalking. This was deliberate, calculated. My 8-year-old son was systematically terrorizing me, and he was using my own fears against me. When he finally let me out 6 hours later, I confronted him directly. Why are you doing this to me? He looked up from his homework, his pencil poised over a math worksheet. Doing what, Mama? Locking me up, trapping me in dark places. This has to stop. His expression shifted subtly, and for just a moment I saw something cold and alien in his eyes. You're sick, Mama. Since Daddy died, you've been acting strange. I'm trying to help you. I'm not sick. I'm grieving, but I'm not. You talk to yourself. You forget things. Yesterday you put salt in your coffee instead of sugar. His voice was calm, reasonable. The doctor said grief can make people confused. I'm just trying to keep you safe until you get better. The worst part was that some of what he said was true. I had been forgetful, distracted. I had caught myself talking to Robert's empty chair more than once. But those were normal responses to loss, not signs of mental illness that required imprisonment. If you're worried about me, we can talk to Dr. Patterson together. But you cannot keep locking me up. Michael nodded solemnly. Okay, Mama, I understand. But I could see in his eyes that he didn't understand at all. Or rather, he understood perfectly. He just didn't care. The boy who sang about love and compassion every Sunday had discovered that fear was a more powerful tool than faith. And he was just getting started. The pattern was established. Now, the confinement, the hours of terror, followed by his reasonable explanations and my desperate need to believe them. Each incident chipped away at my confidence, my sense of reality, my ability to trust my own perceptions. I began hiding crackers in my pockets, water bottles behind books, small flashlights in places I hoped Michael wouldn't find. I was preparing for a war one couldn't admit. I was fighting a war against my own child. The saddest part is that I still loved him. Even as I feared him, even as I began to plan my survival around his cruelty, I still looked at that beautiful face and saw my baby, a child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through midnight fevers, sung to sleep with lullabies. Love, I learned, can be the most dangerous prison of all. Sunday mornings became a special kind of torture. Not because of what Michael did to me at home, but because of what he became the moment we stepped through those heavy oak doors of St. Mark's Lutheran. It was like watching Jekyll transform into Hyde, except the transformation went the wrong direction. The boy who had locked me in the basement the night before would take his place in the choir loft and become something luminous. His voice would soar through hymns about mercy and grace while I sat in the front pew, my hands trembling from the Valium I'd started taking just to function. The congregation would lean forward, tears glistening in their eyes, as my son sang about God's love for his children. "What a blessing that boy is," Mrs. Henderson whispered to me one Sunday, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "You must be so proud, Eleanor, after all you've been through, to have such a devoted son." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up in the middle of the service and tell them all what their little angel had done to me the night before. How he'd waited until I was exhausted from a day of trying to act normal, then herded me into the bathroom and wedged a chair under the door handle. How I'd spent 4 hours sitting on the cold tile floor, my arthritic knees aching, listening to him practice his solo in the living room. Instead, I smiled weakly and nodded. Yes, he's very special. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Pastor Williams was the worst. He'd taken a particular interest in Michael after Robert's death, praising his spiritual maturity and natural gift for ministry. After service, he'd often pull me aside with that concerned pastoral expression that I'd learned to dread. "Eleanor, you look tired. Are you taking care of yourself?" The question was innocent enough, but it felt like an accusation. I was tired bone deep, soul-crushing tired from living in constant fear in my own home. But how could I explain that to this kind man who saw Michael as a shining example of Christian youth? "I'm managing," I'd say, the same response I gave to everyone who asked. "Well, you're blessed to have Michael looking after you. He's such a responsible young man. Just yesterday he was telling me how worried he is about you. How he stays up at night listening for any signs that you might be struggling." My blood would turn to ice. Of course, Michael was worried about me struggling. He was the one causing the struggle. What did he say, exactly? Pastor Williams would pat my shoulder in that patronizing way that made me feel like a child. "He's concerned about your episodes. The sleepwalking, the confusion. He mentioned that sometimes you don't remember things clearly. Episodes. That's what Michael was calling them now. My terror had been rebranded as symptoms of my declining mental state. The boy was systematically destroying my credibility while building his own reputation as a long-suffering caregiver. "I'm not confused, Pastor Williams. I'm grieving, but I'm not. Of course. Grief affects us all differently. But perhaps you should consider talking to someone." Dr. Patterson is very understanding about these matters. The conversation would always end the same way, with Pastor Williams praising Michael's devotion and me walking away feeling more isolated than before. Every Sunday, Michael's performance in the choir loft became more evidence of his good character, while my increasingly haggard appearance became proof of my instability. The other church members weren't much better. They'd smile at me with that pitying expression reserved for the mentally fragile, speaking to me in slow, careful tones as if I might shatter any moment. "How are you doing, dear?" Mrs. Patterson would ask, tilting her head with exaggerated concern. "Michael tells us you've been having some difficult days." Difficult days. As if being imprisoned in my own home was equivalent to feeling a bit under the weather. I tried just once to hint at the truth. It was after a particularly bad week when Michael had locked me in the closet 3 separate times, each incident lasting longer than the last. I was exhausted, desperate, and probably not thinking clearly when I approached Mrs. Henderson after service. "I'm having some trouble with Michael," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. He's been acting strangely since his father died." Mrs. Henderson's face immediately softened with understanding. "Oh, Eleanor, of course. He is. The poor boy has been through so much. Losing his father at such a young age, and watching his mother struggle with grief. It's no wonder he's trying so hard to take care of you." "No, you don't understand. He's not taking care of me. He's being a good son. A remarkable son, actually. Do you know he called me last week because he was worried about leaving?" "You alone?" "He asked if I could check on you while he was at choir practice." She squeezed my hand. "You should be grateful, dear. Not every mother has a child so devoted to her well-being." I stared at her, feeling the last of my hope drain away. Michael hadn't just been building his reputation as a caring son. He'd been actively involving the church community in his deception. He was creating a network of people who would vouch for his character and worry about my stability. The genius of it was breathtaking and terrifying. After that, I stopped trying to get help from the church. I sat in my pew every Sunday, listening to my son sing about love and forgiveness, surrounded by people who would never believe that the boy with the voice of an angel had the heart of a devil. The worst part was when he sang solo. His favorite was "How Great Thou Art," the same hymn he'd sung that first Sunday after he locked me in my bedroom. He'd stand in the choir loft, his hands clasped in front of him, his voice pure and clear, and sing about God's power and love. Meanwhile, I'd sit in the front pew, my purse containing the small bottle of crackers I'd learned to keep with me at all times, my mind calculating how many hours it had been since I'd had access to water. I'd scan the sanctuary, looking for exits, planning escape routes from my own home. But I'd also find myself crying. Not from pride, as the congregation assumed, but from a grief so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. Because the boy singing about God's love was my son, and I was watching him become something monstrous, while everyone around me celebrated his transformation. Sunday after Sunday, I sat in that pew and watched my community choose to believe a lie that was easier to accept than a truth that would shatter their faith in innocent children and devoted sons. They chose Michael's hymns over my screams, and in doing so, they handed him the keys to my prison. Michael's 13th birthday marked the beginning of what I now think of as the dark years. Not that the previous 4 years had been light, but there was something about adolescence that sharpened his cruelty into a precision instrument. The locks appeared first simple slide bolts installed on the outside of doors throughout the house. He told me they were for security, and I was so worn down by that point that I didn't question it. I should have run then. Should have packed a bag and left while he was at school. But where could I go? Everyone in town thought I was losing my mind, and Michael had become so skilled at his explanations that I'd started to believe them myself. Maybe I was sick. Maybe I did need someone to watch over me. The phone monitoring began subtly. Michael would hover nearby when I tried to make calls, offering to help with numbers, or suggesting we call people together. When I attempted to call my sister Margaret in California, he'd remind me about the time difference, or mention that I'd seemed confused the last time we talked. Remember how upset she got when you couldn't remember her daughter's name? He'd say with that concerned expression he'd perfected. Maybe we should wait until you're feeling clearer. But I did remember Jennifer's name. I remembered everything about that conversation, including how Michael had stood beside me the entire time, making faces and gestures that distracted me until I stumbled over my words. I was beginning to understand that his presence during my phone calls wasn't coincidental. It was strategic. The worst realization came when I discovered he'd been intercepting my mail. I'd been wondering why I hadn't heard from Margaret, why the bills seemed to arrive sporadically, why I'd missed several doctor's appointments. One afternoon, while Michael was at choir practice, I found a shoebox in his closet filled with unopened letters addressed to me. Bills, medical notices, and 3 letters from Margaret asking why I hadn't responded to her calls. My hands shook as I read her latest letter. Eleanor, I'm getting worried. You haven't returned any of my calls. And when I tried to reach you yesterday, Michael said you were having one of your episodes and couldn't come to the phone. Are you getting the help you need? Please call me. Episodes. Even Margaret was starting to believe Michael's narrative about my mental state. I felt the familiar crushing weight of isolation settle over me like a blanket made of lead. That night, I confronted him about the letters. I was protecting you, he said, his voice maddeningly calm. Some of these would have upset you. The medical bills, the insurance papers. You're not well enough to handle that kind of stress. I'm not well enough? Michael, I'm 54 years old. I've been handling bills and correspondence longer than you've been alive. Something flickered across his face, a flash of irritation that he quickly suppressed. You're not the same person you were before Dad died. You know that, don't you? The question hit me like a physical blow, because it contained a grain of truth. I wasn't the same person. How could I be? I'd been living in a state of constant fear for 4 years, never knowing when my own child would decide to imprison me next. That Michael was making it sound like the change was pathological rather than the natural result of trauma. I'm different because I'm scared, I said, surprised by my own honesty. I'm scared all the time, Michael. I'm scared of my own son. For just a moment, his mask slipped completely. I saw satisfaction flash across his features, pure, undiluted. Pleasure at my admission of fear. Then it was gone, replaced by hurt confusion. Scared of me? Mama, I'm trying to help you. Everything I do is to keep you safe. But I'd seen that look. I'd seen the truth behind his caring facade, and it chilled me to the bone. The food restrictions started the next week. I'd find the refrigerator locked, or discover that meals I prepared for myself had mysteriously disappeared. Michael would express concern about my erratic eating patterns, and suggest that maybe he should monitor my meals to ensure I was getting proper nutrition. You forget to eat, he'd say, handing me a single piece of toast for breakfast. Yesterday you had 3 cups of coffee and nothing else. That's not healthy. I hadn't forgotten to eat. I'd been locked in the bathroom for 6 hours and couldn't access the kitchen. But explaining that would only result in another lecture about my confused memories. The psychological assault was relentless. Michael would move objects around the house, then express concern when I couldn't find them. He'd change plans we'd made, then act worried when I insisted we'd agreed to something different. He'd interrupt my sleep by playing music or having loud phone conversations, then comment on how restless I'd become. Slowly, methodically, he was erasing my grip on reality. I'd catch myself second-guessing everything. Had I really locked the door, or just imagined it? Had I actually put the milk away? Or was I losing my memory? Was I becoming the confused, unstable woman everyone believed me to be? The worst part was the way he'd comfort me afterward. When I'd break down crying from exhaustion and confusion, he'd hold me like the loving son everyone thought he was, stroking my hair and murmuring reassurances. "It's okay, Mama. I know you're scared. I know you don't understand what's happening to you, but I'm here. I'll always take care of you." In those moments, I almost believed him, almost convinced myself that maybe he really was trying to help, that maybe I really was losing my mind and needed his protection. But then I'd remember the satisfaction in his eyes when I admitted I was afraid, and I'd know the truth. Michael wasn't trying to save me from madness. He was trying to create it. The realization that my own child was deliberately driving me insane was almost too much to bear. But it was also the beginning of my salvation, because once I understood what he was doing, I could finally start to fight back. The question was whether I had any fight left in me, or if Michael had already won. The first time I called the police, I was locked in the basement for the second time that week. Michael had left for school, and I'd managed to reach the old rotary phone that Robert had kept down there for emergencies. My hand shook as I dialed 911, the numbers feeling foreign under my trembling fingers. 911. What's your emergency? My son, I whispered, afraid somehow that Michael might hear me, even though he was miles away. My son has locked me in the basement. I can't get out. There was a pause. Ma'am, how old is your son? 13. Another pause, longer this time. Ma'am, are you saying a 13-year-old boy has overpowered you? The skepticism in her voice made my stomach clench. He didn't overpower me. He waited until I went downstairs to do laundry. Then he locked the door from the outside. There's a bolt. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Are you injured? No, but I've been trapped down here for hours. I'm diabetic and I need my medication. That was a lie. I wasn't diabetic, but I was desperate for someone to take me seriously. And I thought a medical emergency might make them respond faster. Ma'am, I'm going to transfer you to someone who can help you. The line went quiet for a moment. Then a new voice came on, male, patient, the kind of voice you'd use with a confused elderly person. This is Officer Martinez. I understand you're having some difficulty with your son. I started to explain again. But even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how they sounded. A grown woman claiming to be imprisoned by a child. A child who sang in the church choir and helped old ladies carry their groceries. A child whose teachers called him remarkable, and whose pastor considered him a blessing. Ma'am, is it possible? You're confused about what happened. Sometimes when we're upset or stressed, that's when I heard the footsteps upstairs. Michael was home early. He's back, I whispered into the phone. Please, you have to believe me. He's going to... The basement door opened and light flooded down the stairs. Michael stood silhouetted in the doorway, his school backpack still slung over his shoulder. He took in the scene. He huddled by the phone, the receiver clutched in. My hand and his expression shifted from confusion to concern, so quickly I almost missed the transition. Mama, he called down. Are you okay? I heard voices. I held the phone away from my mouth. I'm fine. I was just talking to someone. Who are you talking to? He started down the stairs, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Ah, you talking to 911? Officer Martinez's voice crackled through the receiver. Ma'am, are you still there? Michael reached the bottom of the stairs and gently took the phone from my hands. His touch was careful, loving, the way you'd handle a fragile, confused person. Hello, this is Michael Thompson. I'm so sorry about this. My she's been having some difficulties since my father died. Confusion, memory problems. She gets scared sometimes and thinks things that aren't real. I watched in horror as he performed for the officer the concerned son, the responsible young man dealing with a mother's declining mental health. His voice was perfect, hitting just the right notes of embarrassment and worry. No, sir, she's not in any danger. She came down to do laundry and got confused when the door stuck. It happens sometimes she forgets where she is or how she got there. I was at school, but I came home as soon as I could. The door stuck. As if the heavy slide bolt had somehow engaged itself. Yes, sir. She's been seeing Dr. Patterson. We're managing as best we can, but, well, you understand how difficult these situations can be. Michael handed me the phone. Officer Martinez's voice was kind but dismissive. Ma'am, your son seems to have everything under control. Maybe you should talk to your doctor about adjusting your medication. I wanted to scream that I wasn't on medication, that I wasn't confused, that the boy standing beside me with his hand on my shoulder was a monster disguised as an angel. Instead, I whispered, Yes, sir, I'll do that. After he hung up, Michael helped me up the stairs, the perfect picture of a devoted son caring for his troubled mother. But as we reached the kitchen, he leaned close to my ear. If you ever call the police again, I'll tell them you threatened to hurt yourself. Do you understand? His voice was so quiet, so gentle, that anyone watching would have thought he was whispering words of comfort. But I heard the steel beneath the silk, and I knew he meant every word. The neighbors were next. I tried Mrs. Chun from next door, catching her while she was gardening. But Michael had been helping her with her groceries for months, charming her with his politeness and his concern for his struggling mother. Oh, Eleanor, that boy is an angel, she said, not even looking up from her roses. He worries about you constantly. Just yesterday he asked if I noticed you acting unusual. He's so mature for his age. I tried Mr. Rodriguez from across the street, but he'd already heard about my episode with the police. The story had been refined in the telling now. I was the grief-stricken widow who'd panicked when she couldn't figure out how to open a door. Maybe you should consider getting some help, he suggested gently. There are good facilities for people going through what you're going through. Facilities. He was suggesting I needed to be institutionalized. The final blow came when the county sent a social worker to evaluate our family situation. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, and she was young, earnest, and completely unprepared for Michael's performance. I watched from the kitchen window as she pulled into our driveway, rehearsing what I would say. This was my chance, a trained professional who would surely see through Michael's act. But Michael had prepared for this too. The house was spotless, filled with the smell of fresh-baked cookies. He'd arranged photo albums on the coffee table, pictures of us at church events, school concerts, family gatherings. Evidence of a loving, normal home. Mrs. Thompson is having a difficult time, he told Jennifer, his voice breaking slightly. I try to help her, but sometimes she gets confused or scared. I just want her to be safe. Jennifer ate it up. She praised his maturity, his devotion, his remarkable ability to handle such a challenging situation. When she asked to speak with me alone, Michael reluctantly agreed, the concerned son giving the professional space to work. Your son is remarkable, she told me. It's clear he loves you very much. He's worried about some concerning behaviors, the phone calls, the confusion, about being locked in places. Have you considered that these might be symptoms of something medical? I tried to explain. I tried to tell her about the locks, the intercepted mail, the systematic campaign to make me doubt my own sanity. But every word I spoke only seemed to confirm what Michael had already told her. I understand this is frightening, she said gently. But Michael is doing his best to care for you. Maybe we should talk about getting you some additional support. additional support, more people to monitor my declining mental state, more witnesses to my confusion and erratic behavior. After Jennifer left, Michael brought me tea and cookies, playing the part of the loving son to perfection. But I could see the satisfaction in his eyes, the quiet triumph of someone who'd won another battle in a war one was losing. That night, as I lay in bed listening for the sound of furniture being moved against my door, I realized the horrible truth. Michael hadn't just imprisoned my body. He'd imprisoned my credibility, my relationships, my very identity, and no one was coming to save me. The hall closet had become my nightmare. It was smaller than the others, barely 3 feet wide and maybe 6 feet deep, with a slanted ceiling. That forced me to hunch over like a broken bird. Michael knew I hated it the most, which is exactly why he chose it for what I now realize was meant to be my final punishment. It started with a letter. I'd found it hidden behind a loose baseboard. In my bedroom, a letter I'd written to Margaret but never sent, detailing everything Michael had done to me. I'd written it months earlier in a moment of desperate clarity, thinking maybe if I put it all on paper, I could make sense of what was happening to me. But I'd been too afraid to mail it, too convinced that no one would believe me. Michael found it while I was in the bathroom. I came out to find him sitting on my bed, the letter spread across his lap, his face expressionless as he read my words. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up at me with those cold, calculating eyes that had haunted my nightmares for years. "You wrote this about me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Michael, you called me a monster." His voice was perfectly calm, but I could see the rage building behind his eyes. "You told her I was torturing you." I backed toward the door, but he was faster. At 16, he'd grown tall and strong, his shoulders broad from years of helping with church maintenance. He wasn't the small boy who'd started this campaign of terror. He was nearly a man, and I was a 58-year-old woman who'd been worn down by years of psychological abuse. "You tried to poison her against me," he continued, standing slowly. "After everything I've done for you, after all the ways I've protected you from yourself. You haven't protected me, Michael. You've been shut up." The words came out sharp and cold. "You're sick. You're confused. And now you're trying to spread your sickness to other people." He advanced on me, and I stumbled backward into the hallway. "You need to be taught a lesson about lying, about what happens when you try to hurt people who love you." That's when he grabbed my arm, not gently, not with the careful touch he used when others were watching. His fingers dug into my flesh hard enough to leave bruises, and he dragged me toward the hall closet with a strength that terrified me. "Michael, please. You like writing stories about being locked up." He yanked open the closet door. "Let me give you something real to write about." He shoved me inside so hard I fell against the back wall, my shoulder striking the wooden support beam. Pain shot through my arm, but before I could cry out, he was piling furniture against the door. Not just a chair this time. I could hear the scraping of the heavy bureau, the dining room table, everything he could move. "Michael," I screamed, pounding on the door. "Let me out, please. You're going to stay in there until you understand." His voice came through the wood, muffled but clear. "Until you really understand what it means to be helpless." I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall, then the sound of the front door slamming. He was leaving. Michael was leaving me trapped in this suffocating space, and I had no idea when he'd return. The first few hours were the worst. I was still running on adrenaline, still believing this was just another one of his episodes that would end in a few hours with his usual explanations and fake apologies. I tried to stay calm, to conserve my energy, to believe that surely he wouldn't leave me here long. But the hours stretched on. Day turned to night, and still no sound from the house. My water bottle, the one I'd hidden in my pocket, was empty. The crackers I'd stashed were gone. My throat felt like sandpaper, and my legs trembled from standing in the cramped space dock. By the second day, I was hallucinating. I saw Robert standing in the corner of the closet, his face sad and apologetic. I heard my mother's voice calling my name from somewhere far away. I found myself talking to the coats hanging around me, carrying on conversations with the shadows. "I'm sorry," I whispered to Robert's ghost. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect him. I'm sorry I couldn't fix whatever broke inside him." That Robert just shook his head sadly and faded away. The third day was when I broke completely. I'd soiled myself. Hours earlier, the smell overwhelming in the confined space. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor, my body too weak to hold me upright. I could feel my heart beating irregularly, my vision blurring from dehydration. I was dying. I knew it with a clarity that cut through the hallucinations and confusion. Michael had finally found a way to solve his problem mother permanently. He'd returned to find my body, and everyone would believe his story about how I'd locked myself in the closet during one of my episodes. The perfect crime, committed by the perfect son. I began to pray not for rescue, but for forgiveness. For whatever I'd done wrong as a mother to create this monster. For the sin of bringing a child into the world and failing to teach him love. But mostly, I prayed for it to end quickly. That's when I heard the sirens dot at first. I thought they were part of the hallucinations, but the sound grew louder, closer, and then I heard car doors slamming, voices shouting, footsteps pounding up the front steps. "Mrs. Thompson? Mrs. Thompson, can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but my voice came out as a croak. I pounded weakly on the door, using what little strength I had left. "She's in here," a voice shouted. "Help me move this furniture." The scraping sounds began again, but this time they were the sounds of salvation. Light flooded the closet as the door opened, and I saw 2 police officers staring down at me with expressions of shock and horror. "Jesus Christ," one of them breathed. "Call an ambulance, now." As they lifted me out of that suffocating tomb, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked like a corpse, sunken eyes, grey skin, clothes stained with my own waste. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who'd been tortured nearly to death by her own child. But I was alive. Against all odds, despite Michael's best efforts, I was alive, and for the first time in 6 years. I wasn't going to let anyone convince me that what had happened to me was anything other than what it was. Attempted murder disguised as mental illness. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. The hospital lights were too bright. Not the warm, forgiving light of morning through my kitchen window, but sterile, blue-white beams that seemed to pierce every inch of my skin, searching for what was left of me. They stripped me bare, those lights, exposing not just the bruises on my arms or the dehydration-induced tremors in my hands, but the years I had carried inside, the weight of silence that had hollowed me out. Nurses came and went, voices hushed, movements efficient. I was a patient now, a woman with a wristband and an IV, no longer just Michael's mother. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by him. A young doctor, barely 30 by the look of him, stood at the foot of my bed reading my chart like it was a mystery novel. He was too tired to finish. He asked gentle questions about my medical history, my hydration levels, my age. He didn't ask how I ended up in a closet for nearly 3 days. He didn't ask what kind of person could do that to their mother. Maybe he assumed the answers were obvious. Or maybe he, too, had already been told a version of the story, the version where I was confused, unwell, and difficult. Michael's version. When the social worker came, her clipboard was thicker than my medical chart. Her name was Dana, and she spoke with a kind of practiced warmth that reminded me of Pastor Williams. Trained empathy. "Mrs. Thompson, I want to talk to you about your son," she said as she sat down beside my bed, legs crossed neatly at the ankle. Her tone was soft, as if I might crumble under anything more forceful. I nodded, though every muscle in my body protested. "The movement. Can you tell me what happened?" I could have said everything. I could have started from the beginning. St. Mark's. The choir robes. The first time he moved the furniture against my bedroom door. But the words caught in my throat like stones. Where would I begin? And what good had it ever done? I told her about the closet. I told her I hadn't eaten or had water in 2 days. I told her I thought I was going to die. She wrote everything down. When I paused to catch my breath, she asked, "Do you often feel confused about time, Mrs. Thompson?" I froze. There it was, the doubt creeping in like rot under wallpaper. "Only when I've been locked in a closet for 72 hours. I said flatly. She looked taken aback, maybe even embarrassed, but she recovered quickly. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Chen, said she was worried. That she hadn't seen you in days." A flicker of hope rose in me. Mrs. Chen. The woman who called the police. The only one who had really looked. I nodded slowly. "She saved my life," I said. Dana wrote that down too. But then she asked, "Had you spoken to Mrs. Chun recently? Before this happened? Were you exhibiting any unusual behavior that might have alarmed her?" And just like that, the hope flickered out. Later, 2 officers came to take my statement. One of them was young and clearly uncomfortable. The other a woman in her 40s with a sharp bob and eyes that had seen too much watch me, with a kind of quiet suspicion. They let me talk. I told them about the closet, the letter, the locks. I told them I was not confused. Not delusional. Not senile. Just a woman whose son had spent half his life convincing the world I was all those things. They didn't interrupt. But they didn't write much down either. "Your son is 16, correct?" the older officer asked when I finished. I nodded. "And you're alleging he deliberately confined you against your will?" Another nod. "Have you ever been diagnosed with any psychiatric condition?" I felt something deep in me snap. No. And I shouldn't have to prove my sanity to report a crime. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. I couldn't afford to. They exchanged a look. One of those glances. That said more than any words could. Then they thanked me and left. No promises. No reassurance. No justice. Just the sound of the door closing behind them and the low hum of hospital machines. The next day, Michael came. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring an apology. He brought his church clothes and his charm. Flanked by Sarah, his youth, group leader, and Pastor Williams himself, he entered my hospital room like a grieving son come to visit his fragile mother. "Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking perfectly on the syllable. "I'm so glad you're okay." Pastor Williams reached for my hand. "Eleanor, dear, Michael's been beside himself with worry. He told us everything. About your sleepwalking. About the confusion. About the letter you wrote to your sister." His voice was thick with misplaced concern. "We just want to help." I stared at Michael. He looked the same. Always the same. Impeccable hair. Polished shoes. Eyes like a still pond hiding something monstrous beneath. "You locked me in that closet," I said quietly. "You meant to kill me." Sarah gasped. Pastor Williams drew back as if I'd slapped him. But Michael's expression didn't change. Not even a flicker. "Mama," he said softly, "I think you're tired. You've been through so much." And just like that, the illusion was complete. I was the confused mother again. He was the devoted son. And the lie marched on. When they left, Dana returned with more paperwork. We're recommending a psychiatric evaluation before you're discharged, just to make sure you're okay to return home. I wanted to laugh. Return home? What home? The place I'd spent years being tortured. The prison dressed up as a house? No, I said. I'm not going back there. She paused. Do you have somewhere else to go? I thought of Margaret. Of the letters Michael never sent. I thought of the woman I used to be before all this. I'll find somewhere, I said, and for the first time in years I meant it. I didn't go back to that house. Not even to collect my things. When they discharged me from the hospital 2 days later, I left with a borrowed suitcase from a nurse named Rebecca and the clothes I'd worn the day Michael shoved me into the closet. Everything else, my furniture, my photographs, my wedding ring I hadn't worn in years, I left behind like a shedskin. Margaret booked me a ticket to California the moment she heard my voice over the phone. Her voice cracked when she said my name, like the very sound of it broke something open. Eleanor? Oh my God. Are you safe? Safe. What a strange foreign word that had become . It took 4 weeks for the police to file formal charges. 4 weeks of interviews, paperwork, additional review, and a growing suspicion that they were trying to make the whole thing disappear quietly. Michael was a minor, they kept reminding me. He had no criminal record. He was a beloved member of the church and a pillar of promise, as Pastor Williams described him during a televised interview. The phrase made me nauseous. I watched the segment in Margaret's living room, curled beneath a quilt her daughter had sewn in 8th grade, clutching a glass of water I couldn't bring myself to sip. They made it sound like I was the unstable one, the elderly woman with mental decline, who had misunderstood her son's devotion as abuse. The one with a complicated psychiatric history that Michael's defenders whispered about, but couldn't quite document. No one mentioned the bruises on my arms or the urine-soaked clothes I was found in. No one talked about the malice in Michael's voice when he said, "Let me give you something real to write about." The district attorney agreed to file misdemeanor child endangerment charges. Nothing more. No felony. No attempted homicide. It's the best we can do, the prosecutor told me, her eyes flicking between her notes and the clock on the wall. There's limited precedent for this kind of case. Parent-on-child abuse is far more common. Reversing the roles tends to strain credibility with juries. What about the letter? I asked. What about the closet, the locks, the intercepted mail? She gave a tired sigh. It's compelling, but it's also circumstantial. He says you locked yourself in the closet during a delusional episode. The defense will say you're traumatized, confused, that you made it up to punish him. My fingernails dug into my palms. I almost died in that closet. And yet here you are, she replied, not unkindly, but with the flat detachment of someone who's seen too many women survive and too few men punished for what they've done to them. Michael pled not guilty, of course. His lawyer was sharp, expensive and hand-picked by the church board. At the arraignment, he stood beside his attorney with a Bible in his hand and a look of gentle bewilderment on his face, as if he couldn't quite comprehend why the world had turned against him. This is a misunderstanding, his lawyer said. A family matter misinterpreted through the lens of grief and mental decline. When I took the stand, I tried to speak clearly, calmly. I'd practiced with Margaret, recited the facts 100 times like a rosary. But my voice trembled anyway. I spoke about the closet, the intercepted letters, the locks, the slow erasure of my credibility, and the deliberate confinement that nearly killed me. I refused to cry. I wouldn't give them the image of a weeping, hysterical old woman to parade around in their narrative. But I could feel the doubt in the room. It hung in the air like humidity, thick, heavy, and suffocating. Jurors leaned forward with furrowed brows, not in sympathy, but in confusion. Could a boy like Michael, who sang in choirs and helped his elderly neighbors, really do such things? Could a mother really be a victim of her child? His lawyer cross-examined me gently, like he was correcting an old woman at a dinner table. He brought up the police report from when I called 911, and Michael had calmly convinced the officer I was mistaken. He referenced the social worker's notes about my limited insight and my possible cognitive distortions. He read aloud Michael's school records, his church attendance, the letter from Pastor Williams declaring him an example of Christian maturity. And then he said, "Mrs. Thompson, is it possible that your trauma over losing your husband caused you to misread your son's attempts to care for you?" I stared at him. "Is it possible," I said, my voice hardening, "that you don't want to believe a child can be cruel because it makes your world easier to sleep in?" He blinked, just once. Then he smiled and said, "No further questions." Michael never looked at me during the trial. Not once. He sat beside his lawyer with perfect posture, nodding politely at the judge and the jury, sometimes even smiling at the courtroom reporter, as if this was all just a misunderstanding to be smoothed over. With good manners and Christian humility. The verdict came back after 3 days. Guilty of misdemeanor unlawful confinement. 12 months in juvenile detention, followed by counseling and community service. No record after age 18. A second chance, the judge called it, in recognition of Mr. Thompson's age, his remorse, and his potential. Potential. That word again. They handed my abuser a future, and handed me a pamphlet about trauma recovery, and a quiet suggestion to move forward. There was no news coverage after the sentencing, no interviews, no community backlash, no church apologies. Pastor Williams released a short statement about forgiveness and healing, and the congregation returned to their hymns, grateful that the scandal had passed without too much disruption. But I didn't move on. I moved forward, slowly, deliberately, and with the knowledge that I had stared into the eyes of a boy I once sang lullabies to, and seen the depthless absence of remorse. I had told the truth, even when it cost me everything. And while the world may have only whispered its apologies, I would never whisper mine again. California didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the memories or quiet the echoes of a lock sliding into place. Didn't pull the fear out of my bones or return the years that Michael had siphoned from my body, one insult, one locked door at a time. But it was warm, and it was far, and for the first time in decades, no one knew me as Michael's mother. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore, or the woman with episodes, or the mother of the boy with the angelic voice. I was just Eleanor, a woman with trembling hands and a suitcase full of second-hand clothes, who stood in her sister's guest room and tried to remember how to breathe without permission. Margaret was gentle. She didn't pry, didn't force conversations I wasn't ready to have. She made tea in the evenings and folded my laundry without comment when I forgot it in the dryer. She bought me a notebook and left it on my nightstand with a pen tucked inside. "For your thoughts," she said. But my thoughts weren't ready for paper. They swirled like fog in my head, never settling long enough to capture. So I watched the sea instead. Every morning I walked to the cliffs behind her house and sat on a weather-worn bench overlooking the Pacific, the wind tangling my white hair and the salt stinging my eyes. I liked the ocean. It roared when it needed to and withdrew when it didn't, something I was learning to do myself. Therapy was harder. Margaret insisted, and I agreed grudgingly at first, then with a kind of numb surrender. I found a woman named Dr. Lark, whose office was filled with plants and faded art, prints, and a soft-spoken receptionist who never looked surprised when I sat in the waiting room without speaking. The first few sessions were quiet. I couldn't bring myself to say the words, "My son tried to kill me." I couldn't even say he hurt me. I talked about the weather, about losing Robert, about the way Michael used to hum while washing the dishes. Dr. Lark listened without pushing, her presence a gentle tether in a room where I was used to being scrutinized. It took 6 weeks before I mentioned the closet. 8 before I described the locks. By the 10th week, I could say abuse without choking on the word. Naming it didn't make it hurt less, but it made it real. And for someone whose reality had been rewritten over and over by a boy in a choir robe, that was a start. I had to relearn everything. How to trust my memory. How to sleep through the night without checking the doorframe for shadows. How to eat without rationing my food in case it was taken away. There were days I woke up expecting to see Michael's face in the hallway mirror. Days when I heard the scrape of furniture across the floor in my dreams and bolted upright, drenched in sweat, convinced I'd been locked in again. But there were good days too. Days when I cooked for Margaret's grandchildren and didn't flinch when someone moved behind me. Days when I laughed at an old movie and remembered who I was before Michael made me question my own reflection. Margaret gave me space, but she also gave me purpose. The local library is looking for volunteers, she said one morning, sliding a newspaper across the table with her usual quiet tact. You used to love books. I did. Once. Before every page became an escape route. Before my world shrank to the dimensions of a closet, and the sound of a deadbolt became my lullaby. I called the library that afternoon. It was a small building, tucked between a cafe and a laundromat, its shelves worn but lovingly tended. I started shelving paperbacks twice a week, then manning the front desk on slow afternoons. Children came in after school to do homework, their voices loud and full of life. Sometimes their laughter made my chest ache, but it also filled something in me that had long since emptied out. The head librarian, a woman named Marta, treated me like any other volunteer. She didn't ask about my past. She didn't treat me like I might fracture if someone looked at me too directly. She handed me a badge and a cup of tea and said, "Let me know if you get bored." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt useful. The healing wasn't linear. There were days I avoided the mirror. Nights I sat in the bathtub with the door cracked open and a flashlight within reach. I still kept crackers in my bedside drawer, a leftover reflex I couldn't quite shake. I wrote to Dr. Lark once that healing felt like walking barefoot over glass. Every step forward left blood, but I kept going because there was no other choice. She called that trauma wisdom. I called it survival. I didn't hear from Michael, not after the trial, not after the sentence. Margaret told me he'd been released from juvenile detention after 9 months, that he'd completed his community service and returned to St. Mark's with open arms. Redemption story, she said bitterly, folding laundry with more force than necessary. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want them. I didn't need to know what mask he was wearing now, or who had chosen to believe in it. The truth was, some monsters never had to hide. They simply learned how to smile better. One morning, nearly a year after I arrived in California, I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, the air still. I walked to the beach alone and watched the sky, bleed pink and gold over the water. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid. I still carried the past. It clung to me like salt air present, lingering, impossible to wash off completely. But I wasn't drowning in it anymore. I was standing. I was breathing. I was here. And I had no intention of ever being silent again. There are things I've lost that I can name: my house, my wedding china, my favorite winter coat that still smelled faintly of cedar and Robert's cologne. But there are other losses that don't fit into boxes or inventory lists, the kind that burrow into your sense of self and hollow you out from the inside. I never remarried. Not because I didn't want companionship or laughter at the end of the day, or someone's hand beside mine in bed, but because I couldn't stand the thought of trusting anyone again. Not with my body, not with my truth. The idea of explaining Michael to someone new, of watching their face shift from shock to confusion to doubt, was too exhausting to entertain. I avoided mirrors for a long time. Not because of age or vanity, I had earned every line carved into my skin, but because my reflection reminded me of all the times I'd doubted myself. All the times I'd stared into those same eyes and asked, is this really happening? Or am I losing my mind like everyone says? That was the worst part. Not the hunger or the bruises or the locked doors, but the slow erosion of my reality. The way Michael chipped away at my certainty until all I had left were questions. Until I couldn't tell the difference between my instincts and his voice, echoing in my head. When people hear about my story and only a handful know the whole of it, they often say things like, "You're so strong," or "I don't know how you survived." But strength had nothing to do with it. Survival isn't noble. It's practical. You breathe because your lungs haven't stopped. You eat because your stomach aches. You lie to the pastor, to your neighbors, to yourself, because the truth would burn everything down, and no one's handing you a fire extinguisher. What they should say is, "I'm sorry no one came," or "I'm sorry it took so long to believe you." There is a peculiar kind of shame in being abused by your child. It unmoors you from the identity of motherhood, this sacred, untouchable role society worships, but also demands perfection from. When the world imagines a mother, they see someone soft, patient, enduring. Someone who forgives before the offense is even finished being spoken. But what happens when that devotion is weaponized against you? What happens when the person you carried in your body uses your love like a choke chain? No one wants to talk about that. It makes people uncomfortable. It makes them question their stories about family, about loyalty, about who deserves protection. Still remember the day I realized Michael wasn't just cruel, he was calculating. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't teenage rebellion or grief or confusion. It was deliberate, strategic harm, masked in concern and soaked in scripture. And yet, even after that clarity, I found myself rationalizing. Maybe he was broken. Maybe he needed more time. Maybe if I stayed very small and very good, he would stop hurting me. That's what abuse does. It teaches you to bargain with your own erasure. Sometimes I wonder how my life would have unfolded if Robert hadn't died. Would Michael have turned out different? Would I have noticed sooner, intervened earlier, before the lies calcified and the locks became permanent fixtures? Or was the cruelty always there, waiting for the right conditions to bloom? I'll never know. That's the cruelty of hindsight. It offers no do-overs, only endless autopsies of what might have been. The trauma didn't just touch me. It spilled into everything I touched. Friendships I couldn't sustain. Letters I never returned. Neighbors who stopped calling because they didn't know what to say. Or worse, because they believed him. I think sometimes about Margaret, how she kept writing even when I didn't respond. How she stored up those unanswered letters like seeds in winter, never knowing if they'd grow into anything. When I finally called her from that hospital bed, she cried not just because I was alive, but because she hadn't imagined I still could be. I've read a lot about trauma in the years since. About complex PTSD, gaslighting, learned helplessness. The words help. They give shape to the ache. But they don't undo the years I spent second-guessing myself, or the friendships I let die, because I was too ashamed to explain what was happening. In my own home, people think shame is about what you've done, but more often, it's about what you've let happen to you, what you couldn't stop. And nothing invites shame like motherhood. The world expects sacrifice from mothers, but Only the kind that leaves no blood. I gave everything to my son, my trust, my faith, my voice, and when he turned those gifts into shackles, I still blamed myself. Even now, decades later, I struggle with that guilt. I think about Michael's children, Emily and Josiah, and wonder what kind of father he became. I worry that his shadow is falling over them the way it fell over me, silently, slowly, until they no longer remember where the light used to be. I once considered reaching out to his wife, anonymously, just to plant a seed of doubt, just in case. But what would I say? Would she believe a letter from a faceless mother long estranged? Or would she clutch it to her chest, terrified already, suspecting the truth and now forced to live with it? There are no perfect endings in stories like mine. No grand justice. No triumphant return. The truth didn't set me free, it carved a space in my life that I now tend like a wound that will never fully heal. But there is a kind of peace in naming things. In standing in front of your own reflection and saying, that happened. And it wasn't your fault. There's power in that. Quiet, steady, unshakable power. And maybe that's enough. Not to erase the past, but to live beside it without fear. The day of Michael's funeral came and went without me. I watched the service through a live stream link that Margaret's granddaughter found online, tucked away behind a paywall on the church's website. I didn't recognize most of the faces filling the pews, though I saw Pastor Williams at the pulpit, grayer now but still delivering the same smooth cadence I remembered. The sanctuary looked smaller than I recalled, less like the grand cathedral of my trauma, and more like an ordinary building filled with ordinary people clinging to their beliefs. The camera panned across the choir loft, empty now, draped in black ribbon. The screen displayed a slideshow of Michael's life baby photos, graduation portraits, a wedding photo where he looked every bit the devoted husband. There were no images of me. Not a single one. His childhood had been carefully edited, as if I'd never existed at all. They buried him in a white casket embossed with gold crosses. The choir sang, "How Great Thou Art," and for a moment I thought I might shatter. That same hymn, the one I used to hear echo off the stained glass as I sat shaking in a locked bathroom or closet, had become his final anthem. The congregation cried. They whispered that he was too young, too good, too full of light. I didn't cry. I closed my laptop, stood up from my chair, and went to the kitchen to make tea. There was nothing left to grieve. The next day I wrote a letter to his widow. Not to accuse, not to expose, but to offer a quiet gesture just in case. I told her I was sorry for her loss. I said I knew grief was complicated, that sometimes people leave behind more questions than answers. I included a list of resources, hotlines, counseling centers, a domestic abuse organization that specialized in hidden patterns of control. I didn't mention closets or locks. I didn't say his name more than once. I signed it plainly, from someone who knew another side of Michael. I don't know if she ever read it. I don't know if she ever needed it. But I needed to send it. I needed to say, you are not crazy. You are not alone. My life now is quiet. And maybe that's the greatest mercy. I still volunteer at the shelter. On Tuesdays and Fridays, I sit with women, some young, some older than me, who carry secrets like lead weights behind their ribs. I don't tell them everything, but I tell them enough. That I understand what it's like to be disbelieved. To be made into a ghost inside your own house. That survival isn't just getting out. It's learning to trust your own thoughts again. I watch the recognition bloom in their faces. The relief of being seen. Sometimes, when they're ready, they say thank you. That they don't have to. I remember what it meant to just have someone listen. Mrs. Chen is still alive. 95. And sharp as ever. We talk every other Sunday. Sometimes about the past, but mostly not. She lives in a care home now, surrounded by nurses who love her, and a cat that won't leave her side. She doesn't like video calls. Says she prefers to hear voices rather than faces. The soul lives in the voice, she once told me. That's how I knew something was wrong in your house. Your voice disappeared. I owe her more than I can put into words. She didn't just call the police, she believed her instincts, even when the story didn't make sense. She listened to her gut and saved my life. I think about that often. How small choices can become lifelines for someone else. I've kept the letter I wrote to Margaret all those years ago, the one Michael found and used against me. It's yellowed now, the edges curling from age, but I keep it in a small wooden box beside my bed. Not as a symbol of failure, but as a reminder of the moment I first dared to name what was happening to me. The first time I chose truth over shame. It was my proof, before anyone else believed me, that I believed myself. Sometimes I open it and read the final paragraph. If anything happens to me, please remember that I tried. I tried to love him, to help him, to survive him. But if I disappear, don't let my story die with me. That story is mine now. I don't tell it often, and never to strangers, but I carry it with me. It's in the way I touch someone's shoulder when they can't speak. In the way I leave the hallway light on at the shelter overnight. In the way I pause before closing a door. Survivors have a language beyond words. We speak in gestures, in silence, in breath. And when one of us finds her voice again, it sends ripples through the world, quiet ones, but no less powerful. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean forgiving. Either not when the wound was deliberate and the apology never came. Healing means reclaiming the space inside your body that used to belong to fear. It means choosing what to carry forward and what to lay down. It means standing in the sun with your whole face visible and saying, I survived. I'm 78 now. I drink tea with honey every morning. I watch the ocean through the kitchen window and talk back to the gulls when they get too loud. I still keep crackers in my purse, not because I'm afraid anymore, but because sometimes I meet women who need them. I wear the same cardigan every Tuesday at the shelter, because one of the girls told me it reminds her of her grandmother, and that makes her feel safe. I take my pills without shame. I call Margaret every week. I write poems in a notebook no one reads. I sing sometimes, too, but only when I'm alone. Never in churches. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, and the air smells like salt and eucalyptus, I imagine what life might have been if Michael had turned out differently. If the boy with the angel's voice had chosen kindness instead of cruelty. If I'd been allowed to love him without fear. That those thoughts pass quickly now. I let them drift out with the tide, like messages in bottles meant for a future that never came. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for justice. What I have now is something deeper, something earned. I have peace, and no one can lock that away.